that Al-Ghazali said it's equal in the sight of Allah to put the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and all of the believers into the hellfire and put the shaitan and Abu Lahab and all of the disbelievers into paradise. They're completely equal in the sight of Allah, and he chooses one over the other only based on his complete arbitrary will, not based on some prior hikmah or perfection. Truly, I say this honestly, if I believed that that was the standard position of the Quran wa Sunnah, I would not be a Muslim today. I would leave the fold of Islam. I would have never become a Muslim to begin with. This is how serious this is, what they're spewing. Today I have another, what I think is an extremely important episode. For people who have seen, I made a recent video on the Aqidah of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and one particular part of it was clipped out by a YouTube channel. And not only did this YouTube channel clip it out, they attempted to respond to my claims about the Ash'ari position on whether or not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala acts for reasons according to the Ash'ari Aqidah or theology. Now, this person basically is claiming that I'm misrepresenting Ash'ari Aqidah, that I'm ignorant, that I just don't understand what their actual position is. And there were several other people who insinuated the same thing or directly stated that. So I will be addressing that issue. But a lot of people are wondering, why does this even matter? Why is Jake even focusing on this at a time like today, when Palestine is being bombarded, their people are being slaughtered, their land is being taken, and all of that is extremely important. But that actually causes issues within the ummah that are directly related to this topic. For example, why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willing and allowing for this to occur? Is there any reason or hikmah or divine wisdom behind why he is allowing what is occurring in Palestine right now or Muslim lands around the world? The atrocities that are occurring, are there any reasons behind that? Why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why Allah is allowing that to happen? Now, I firmly believe, yes, that there is. Why? Because the Quran and the Sunnah and the Salaf clearly explained it and understood the Quran in that manner. It's very clear. It's fitri, right? It's a basic common intuition that all human beings have. When we go through struggles in our life, we wonder, why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowing this to happen? I can think of several examples in my own life, but obviously my issues or my difficulties are nothing in comparison to what the Palestinians are going through. So I want the audience to frame the discussion in this manner. Do you believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates, judges, does anything that he does for reasons, for perfect wisdoms? Is there perfect wisdom behind his actions? Does he have a purpose for what he's doing? Is there a purpose behind his plan and what he's allowing and willing to occur? If your answer is yes, then you cannot be an Ash'ari. Why? Because the standard Ash'ari position is to say no, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not do anything for any purpose or perfect wisdom. No, none whatsoever. And I will demonstrate that and inshallah make that very clear. But I hope people understand why this question is so important, because many Muslims struggle with the difficulties that are experienced in this life. But we know through the examples in the Quran and Sunnah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a divine wisdom and reason behind why he's allowing and willing to whatever occurs to actually happen. So when you take that away from Muslims, when you say, no, Allah does not have a wisdom or reason for why he's doing what he's doing, that's a very dangerous thing to say to a Muslim. Now, I know that many Ash'aris won't say this, and the honest reality why they believe that I'm misrepresenting their theology is because they're extremely ignorant of their own creed. I've had discussions with other Athari or Salafi brothers about this, and many of them actually are accusing you people of dishonesty. Oh, Brother Jake, they know about this. They're just dishonest. They just don't want to come out and admit it to the laity, to the lay people, because they understand how big of an effect that will have. That may be true for some of their heads, those who are very knowledgeable in their own school. But for the most part, it's very clear to me that most of these Ash'aris are completely ignorant. They do not know what their own school teaches, and especially regarding this specific issue. So inshallah, I'm going to demonstrate that the standard Ash'ari position is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not do anything for any reason whatsoever. Everything in the sight of Allah is equal. Him commanding shirk or polytheism and him commanding to not worship anything other than him are equal in the sight of Allah. There's no difference whatsoever prior to him acting and commanding one or the other. There is absolutely no difference whatsoever. He does not favor one over another. He does not believe that there's more wisdom in one over the other, in polytheism or worshiping him alone. It is solely the choice of his arbitrary will as to which one he chooses, commanding the people to worship him alone or commanding shirk and idol worship. So inshallah, this is going to be a long, detailed video, but I hope that it benefits the people, and I believe that it's extremely important at this time. As I said earlier, I mentioned that I briefly brought up this topic in a recent video where I went through the Aqidah of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah and explained that the Ash'aris and Maturidis are not, Ahl Sunnah. If people want to check that out, in the description of this video, I'll put a link, and there's a lot more detail to that whole topic in general. However, I want to narrow in on this specific topic, and in that video, I briefly mentioned what I'm about to go through, and there was a response. So first, let's take a look at the so-called response video, and I want to be clear from the outset that the brother who has this channel, he takes a lot of clips from their scholars, from Ash'ari and Maturidi scholars, and then he does translations of what they said, their Arabic videos. I think he's done the same thing here. I asked him if this video was meant by this mufti to be a direct response to me or not, or he just clipped it from somewhere and he thought it was relevant to responding to me. He refused to answer, but he answered many other people. So I'm taking that as most likely no, it's not meant to be a direct response to me. It's meant to be a response to this discussion overall, and the mufti never read my article, which I have on this discussion, or saw anything that I actually had to say about the topic. So anyway, let's take a look at the video and then we'll jump into it after that, inshallah. The Ash'aris say no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't do anything for reasons. To affirm that he does things for reasons would negate his will. He doesn't do anything genuinely for reasons. We say no, he does do things for reasons. He has a hikmah for why he's doing everything and allowing everything to happen, including the atrocities that are occurring in Palestine right now, including all of the oppression that is happening to the Muslims.
هل الأشاعرة ينفون الحكمة؟ وعندما نقول يا إخوة الأشاعرة هم مفسرو القرآن، هم الذين فسروا القرآن، أئمة التفسير، أئمة الفقه، أئمة الأصول، كما تكلمنا عن ذلك مرارا، ولهذا نحن ندافع عنهم وبشدة ونناضل عنهم وبشدة، لأن الطعن فيهم طعن في كتب التفسير، وطعن في كتب العقيدة، وطعن في كتب الفقه، وفي كتب أصول الفقه، ولا يفعل ذلك من يعقل، لا يفعل ذلك من يعقل. طيب، هل الأشاعرة ينفون الحكمة؟ ما معنى أولا؟ ما معنى ينفون الحكمة؟
So this mufti is starting off after they played a short clip from my video. Do the Ash'aris deny divine wisdom? And obviously he's not responding to me, so this isn't the first time it's been claimed by anyone, and I'm going to demonstrate this very clearly, right? It's not just Jake Brancatella who came up with this, who pulled it out of his hat. No, not whatsoever. And he mentioned this point about why we have to defend the Ash'aris so sternly and so strongly. Why? Because they're the masters of Aqidah and Fiqh and Usul al-Fiqh and tafsir and so on and so forth. But focus on that point of tafsir, because I'll show you that these same Ash'aris have to butcher the Arabic language and have to butcher tafsir because the Arabic language and the clear apparent meaning of the Quran was Sunnah do not actually fit with their claim about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala acting for no reason at all. And that will demonstrate that I'm not misrepresenting their position. So, we can refute what he said, and that deserves another video. That we don't need to rely on Ash'ari scholars, generally speaking. Not to say that they haven't had any good works, that's not my point. But I'm going to show you specifically on tafsir and how they interpret the Quran based on their false understanding of divine wisdom.
يعني أن الله تعالى لا يفعل فعلا إلا وفعله تعالى متضمن للحكمة، وأن فعله ليس بعبث. هل هذا الشيء ينفيه الأشاعرة؟ لا، هذا لا ينفيه الأشاعرة. الأشاعرة لا ينفون أن الله تعالى حكيم وأن أفعاله متصفة بغاية الحكمة، هذا لا ينفيه الأشاعرة. طيب، إذا قرأنا في كتاب من كتب الأشاعرة بأن الله تعالى يفعل لا لغرض، وأن الله منزه عن الغرض، ما معنى منزه عن الغرض؟ ما معنى منزه عن أن يفعل لحكمة؟
By the way, notice the way that the person is translating the word gharad, or in the plural aghrad, which simply means, in plain Arabic, all it means is purpose or purposes or reasons or reason. But the translator is translating it as having to do with a need, as something that is being forced, free from need. He keeps putting this word need in there, but that's not the apparent meaning of aghrad, and that's not even what this mufti is saying. Now, he may understand it that way, but that's not what the word actually means.
الغرض. ما معنى منزه عن الغرض؟ ما معنى منزه عن أن يفعل لحكمة؟ الفعل يقصد، يعني هذا لابد من مراعاة المصطلحات، معرفة المصطلحات، ماذا يقصد المتكلم بكلامه. مقصود الأشاعرة أن الله تعالى لا يحتاج إلى شيء ويتوصل إلى ذلك الشيء بشيء آخر. الله تعالى غني عن العالمين. فمثلا تحريم شيء أو إباحة شيء، لم يحرم الله تعالى هذا الشيء من أجل أن يحصل وأن يوجد وأن يفعل ذلك الشيء. لم يحرم الله تعالى الخمر من أجل أن يحصل تعالى، من أجل أن يخلق المولى جل جلاله عبادا عقلاء لا تذهب عقولهم. لو أراد الله ذلك لجعلهم عقلاء شربوا الخمر أو لم يشربوها، وجعل الخمر غير مؤثرة في ذهاب عقولهم. الله تعالى قادر، لا يحتاج إلى هذا الحكم من أجل أن يصل إلى غرضه. فالله تعالى ليس له غرض، الله تعالى ليس له غرض، الله غني. الإنسان لا يفعل فعل.
Notice again, he keeps translating the word gharad as being free from need, right? That's not what the direct translation of the word is. It simply means purpose or reason.
يفعل فعلا، العاقل لا يفعل فعلا إلا من أجل احتياج، من أجل أن يحصل على شيء، فيفعل شيئا من أجل شيء. الله تعالى لا يفعل شيئا من أجل شيء. لماذا؟ لأن الله غني عن كل شيء. لكن ما أمرنا به فيه الحكمة، نعم. ما نهانا عنه فيه الحكمة، نعم. لكن الله تعالى لا يتوصل إلى مراده من خلال الاحتياج والفقر. هذا المقصود بنفي الغرض والعلة والباعث، أن الله تعالى يفعل لا لغرض لا لعلة لا لباعث.
Okay, so there you have it, folks. Very clearly, there's a mistranslation every time the word gharad is being used. It means simply purpose or reason, but the translator always wants to use it in the sense of not needing something. And this is what many Ash'aris, I think partly because the translator does not understand his actual aqidah and what he's supposed to be affirming. And we'll see another few examples of this. So let's take a look at this. This is a tweet from Dr. Shadi al-Masri. He says, all of the Creator's actions have wisdom. And this is the same thing that the Mufti claimed. But I'm going to demonstrate what they mean by wisdom is not what anyone else is going to understand by wisdom. It's not on the side of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not wisdom within Allah. It's not wisdom within His act itself. It's an effect of the action. The wisdom or the hikmah of Allah is only in creation itself. It's not within Allah. It's not something that's prior to the act. It's not something that informs the act as to why Allah did something rather than something else. So this is I don't know, maybe dishonesty or let's say ignorance on their part, because that's what I'm sticking with for this. And I'm not talking about this mufti specifically. I'm speaking about the translator and Dr. Shadi al-Masri, and then we'll see another example in just a second. So he says, all of the Creator's actions have wisdom. He is simply not forced to do anything. Otherwise, he would not be independent. Do Salafis or Atharis make the claim that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is forced to do anything? No, we don't say that he's forced to do anything. They're bringing up a false dichotomy. They think the debate is about the Salafi Athari is saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is forced to do things, and the Ash'ari says, no. Allah has a hikmah or reason behind every action before He performs the act as to why He's doing one thing rather than something else. It's just that those reasons are not forcing Him to do anything. They don't necessitate His action. He could have done something differently. Now, I wish that were the case, but that's not actually the Ash'ari position, which I'm going to demonstrate. It's that He does not have a hikmah. He does not have a gharad. He does not have a reason which is prior to the act, which informs the act to choose one thing rather than something else. He says true oneness implies absolute independence, because if God needed anything, then that thing would deserve partial credit for the creation. I agree. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is free from need. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. That's something we can agree on. And he has it captured on the part where it says Allah does not do anything because he needs to do it, a reason forcing him to. Again, the Mufti did not use the word of forcing him to do. The word simply is gharad. There is no about forcing or not. That just simply means purpose or reason. That's the second example. Let's go to the third example. This is another individual whom I actually know. He says, to say the Ash'aris, quote, no, Allah doesn't do anything for reasons, obviously he's quoting me, referring to me, is either a display of extreme dishonesty or extreme incompetence. This is studied in the most basic books of Kalam and Usul al-Fiqh. I agree. I guess it seems that you have not actually studied the most basic texts of Kalam and Usul al-Fiqh. So I'm going to help you out, brother, don't worry. I'm going to demonstrate what I'm saying is not a misrepresentation of the position. What I want people to understand very clearly, at this point in the dialogue, we cannot go to even going into a lot of detail of refuting the Ash'ari position, because at this point, we're still trying to teach the lay Ash'aris and Salafis, to be frank, what the Ash'aris actually believe about this topic. We have to teach them their own aqidah first, and then refute them, because as of this point, they say that I and the other people are misrepresenting them, and I'm going to show you that Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim and our scholars interpret the Ash'aris in the same way. This is not something that Jake Brancatella came up with, God forbid. Now I also want to show you that this is not only Jake's understanding. Let's take a look and I'll show you how this is relevant, because there are these aqidah liberalists, those who think that, oh, these are just ijtihadi matters, that there's genuine ikhtilaf and no problem, mashi mushkil, you can believe what you want. No. This is a serious issue, which I'm going to show from Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. But this video here from William Lane Craig, who is one of the most popular and influential Christian apologists today, he makes a criticism of Islam, even though this is not the Islamic position. This is not the position of the Quran was Sunnah. This is the position of the Ash'aris, but because he doesn't know enough, or maybe he's dishonest, but I think it's ignorance as well, he attributes this view to Islam in totality, and therefore, based upon that principle, rejects Islam. Now, that's obviously not the only reason, but he's using this as an argument against Islam, which in reality, it's just an argument against the Ash'ari position, which I would applaud and say, yes, Mr. William Lane Craig, you're perfectly correct. So let's take a listen.
Next question. This is from Canada. Greetings, Dr. Craig. I'm a Muslim who happened to stumble upon your website to explore answers to the question of God's omnibenevolence. Your answer to the question is quite insightful. I did, however, wish to raise one question, though. In your Question of the Week, number 177, Perfect Being Theology article, I was surprised to see you say, so suppose someone is not a moral nihilist and thinks that omnibenevolence is a moral property, but denies that God has it because it infringes on his omnipotence. I can imagine a Muslim arguing this way. End of quote. I'm curious to know where you'd learned that Muslims deny an omnibenevolent God. A clear counter-argument can be drawn from practically any page in the Quran, as the two most oft-repeating names of God are the most merciful and the most forgiving. Respectfully, Asib in Canada.
So William Lane Craig, to break that down, wrote an article. He made a small statement about what he thinks is Islamic theology. He used the word omnibenevolence, which just means that God is all good. God is good. Now, Christians have this concept. And William Lane Craig says, no. Muslims don't believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is good because of his pure divine will, his pure omnipotence, the fact that he's all powerful. He can do whatever he wants, and that trumps his omnibenevolence or goodness. And this is a Muslim who says, that's not the Islamic position. It contradicts the Quran on nearly almost every page. And I agree. So look, this is a Muslim who had a shubha or contention based upon what? What William Lane Craig said, and he's trying to understand, where'd you even get this from? But what William Lane Craig is representing is just basically the Ash'ari position, which we'll go on to show.
What I meant, Asib, is that it seems to me that in Islam, omnibenevolence is not an essential property of God, because God's omnipotence trumps everything. It trumps even his own moral character. So, for example, Muslims actually believe that on the day of judgment, if God wanted to, he is so powerful that he could decide at that last minute that he's going to send all faithful Muslims to hellfire forever, and he's going to instead save all of the Christians and the atheists. And for the Muslim, God is so omnipotent that you cannot say that he would be constrained by his moral character or omnibenevolence from doing such a thing. He can do whatever he wants. And so that's what I meant. It seems to me that in Islam, there is this view that the omnipotence of God supersedes or trumps any other characters that he might have, including even his mercy and love.
So there you have it. William Lane Craig says that in Islam, and notice he's saying in Islam, he's not saying in Ash'ari Aqidah, or one school of theology, which we've already demonstrated as deviant. And he says, what is the view? That on the day of judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could simply throw all of the believers in hellfire, those who are genuinely actually believers, including the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, into hellfire, astaghfirullah, and put the shaitan and all of the disbelievers, like the Pharaoh and so on and so forth, in paradise, in Jannah. Did William Lane Craig just pull this out of his backside? I wish that were the case, but I'll show you that Ash'ari scholars explicitly say this. That's where he's getting it from. Al-Ghazali explicitly teaches this. Yes, I will show you that. This is not what the Quran was Sunnah say. This is not what our position is as Atharis or Salafis. No, our position is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would never do that. Why? Because it contradicts his hikmah. It contradicts his perfect wisdom. It contradicts his perfection as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the Ash'aris don't say that. Because if Allah were to do that, that would not be considered naqs. That would not be considered an imperfection for Allah. But we say if Allah were to do that, it's not because out of his weakness or power that he's constrained that he couldn't do it. It's because it would be an imperfection and it would contradict his perfect wisdom, his perfect hikmah. Now I have a video on this topic where I went into detail specifically on that video from William Lane Craig. I'll put a link in the description of this video. But I wanted to show again how this issue is also definitely related to Palestine and everything happening in the world, and how Christian apologists use the Ash'ari position, claim it's the Islamic position, and then use it as a refutation of Islam. So we have to respond to this. All you people who are saying it's irrelevant, you just don't know what you're talking about. I'm sorry to say. So now let's actually go into the heart of the matter. Let's go into the heart of the matter and let's go through quotes from our scholars who understand these texts of the Ash'aris the same way that I am, and also the Ash'aris themselves who explain it in the exact way. I want the Salafis or Atharis to understand this as well, because I'm criticizing the Ash'aris for not knowing their Aqidah, but then I'm also going to criticize the Salafis and the Atharis. Why are we not talking about this issue? Because when you see this quote from Shaykh al-Islam, he says this is one of the most important issues and one of the most important differences between us and the Ash'aris. So why are we not discussing this? Yes, all of the other debates are important. I understand, like istighatha, extremely important. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being above the throne, extremely important. Yad Allah, extremely important. All of those topics are extremely important, but we're neglecting other topics. I have not seen any Salafis or Atharis, especially in English, speaking about this subject in detail. Why is that? Is it because they don't know what the Ash'ari position is? Or they don't feel it's that important? I want to stress that it is important, and Shaykh al-Islam explains how important it is right here. He says, this is a significant matter, one of the most paramount major issues that people have engaged in, encompassing the greatest of divisions and branches, one of the greatest issues of distinction, and it is replete with doubts and contentions, for it is related to the attributes of Allah, exalted be He, His names, actions, and commandments, concerning orders and prohibitions, promises and threats. It pertains to His creation and command, for everything in existence is connected to this matter. Everything in existence is connected to this matter. And you say this is irrelevant? It doesn't matter today. All created beings are associated with it, and it is linked to the Creator, glorified be He. Similarly, all religious laws are interconnected with it, as are the issues of divine decree and commands, as well as the matters of attributes and actions. These comprise the essential sciences of the people, the knowledge of jurisprudence, fiqh, which that one brother just mentioned, which involves commands and prohibitions, is tied to this issues. Scholars have discussed the reasoning behind legal rulings and the commands and prohibitions, such as the command to worship Allah alone, to be truthful and just, and to observe prayer, almsgiving, fasting, and pilgrimage, as well as the prohibitions against shirk or polytheism, lying, injustice, and indecency. Did he, meaning did Allah, command this for wisdom? Did he command for a wisdom and benefit, or a cause necessitating it? Or was it merely out of his will and sovereign intent? Was it merely just an arbitrary will? Okay, there's no reason, there's no hikmah or wisdom prior to the act itself over why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to command his people, chose to command his creation to serve and worship only Allah alone instead of worshiping creation, committing shirk. Was there a wisdom or a reason prior to the act where Allah said, oh, I'm going to command, astaghfirullah, of course, I'm just putting this so people understand, I'm going to command to shun shirk, shun polytheism, and worship me alone, but there's no reason why I'm choosing that instead of the opposite, to actually command polytheism and shirk. The Ash'aris actually believe that there is no reason prior to the act itself why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to command shirk or not. And we'll see that as we go on. He says, are the causes of the Sharia understood as motivators and instigators, or are they merely signs and indicators? Is it within the bounds of wisdom for Allah to forbid monotheism? Is it within the bounds of Allah for him to say, I want to forbid monotheism? Is that consistent with this divine wisdom, truthfulness, and justice, while commanding polytheism, lying, and injustice? Furthermore, people have debated Allah's exoneration from injustice. Is he transcendent above it while still possessing the ability to commit it? Or is injustice inherently impossible and therefore cannot occur? They have also discussed Allah's love, pleasure, anger, and wrath, which the Ash'aris don't really believe in, that they just believe that's just arbitrary will. Are these attributes that correspond to his will, like I just said, or are they merely created rewards and punishments, or are they attributes more distinct from their will, which we believe? They disputed over what transpired on earth in terms of disbelief, immorality, and disobedience. Does he will, love, and approve of it as he wills and loves everything else that occurs? Or does it occur without his power and will, rendering him unable to guide the misguided or misguide the guided? Or do these events occur by his will and power, and nothing happening in his dominion that he does not will, while he possesses profound wisdom in all his creation, even though he hates it, abhors it, and detests its perpetrator? He does not love corruption, nor is he pleased with disbelief of his servants, nor does he will it with the legislative will that encompasses his will and pleasure, even if he has willed it with the universal will that encompasses what he has decreed and ordained. The subdivisions of this principle are numerous, so there's many different ways we can go and cannot be thoroughly examined here. Those who assert that he created the creatures and commanded the commandments without cause, motivation, or incentive, claiming that he did so purely by his will, who is he talking about? The Ash'aris. And sovereign intent, include many who affirm the divine decree and associate with the Sunnah from the people of Kalam, meaning the Mutakallimun, the Fuqaha, those the scholars of fiqh and jurisprudence, and others. Many of the followers of Malik, Ash-Shafi'i, Ahmed, and others have expressed this view. Notice that he left out Imam Abu Hanifa because the Maturidis are said to really fall in line with the Aqidah of Imam Abu Hanifa. Now, we don't believe that totally, but we'll see that even the Maturidis criticize the Ash'aris over this, and they basically accuse them of kufr over this issue. And others have expressed this view, which aligns with that of the Al-Ash'ari, Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, and his companions, as well as many of the deniers of analogy, meaning those who denied qiyas within fiqh, such as Ibn Hazm and his like. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah is explaining the view in exactly the way I said. The followers of Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari from the different schools, and he left out Imam Abu Hanifa because the Maturidis are more said to follow him and they reject the Ash'aris on this principle, and they disagree with them and accuse them actually of kufr. He left them out, and many of the followers of those schools followed Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari and on this position, which is exactly what I said, that there is no reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded one thing over another. There isn't a hikmah or divine wisdom or reason that is prior to the act itself, which informs his act as to why he chose one thing instead of something else. People say, oh, but Jake, that is Ibn Taymiyyah. Who cares? Who cares what you Wahhabis have to say? Who cares what you pseudo-Salafis have to say? Who cares what you deviants have to say? Okay, fair enough. Let's now go through, starting with Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari and going through the Ash'ari scholars themselves on this and explaining exactly what they state. Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari says on Allah not acting for reasons, he says he, speaking about Allah, is not questioned about what he does, and his actions have no causes, for he is a master, not a subject, neither subject to command nor prohibition. So he does not act for causes or reasons. He doesn't have a reason or cause for his action as to why he chooses one thing over another. It's not that he has a reason, but it doesn't necessitate his action. It's that he doesn't have a cause or reason whatsoever. And this will become extremely clear. Now remember what that mufti said? We can't go against the Ash'aris because they're the masters of tafsir. Well, let's show what their tafsir of the Quran is in light of this principle of rejecting ta'lil. We'll see this very clearly. So now let's go to Ash-Shahrastani, who was actually a kafir Zindiq, who was not even an Ash'ari. So I'm not takfiring him based on the fact that he was not an Ash'ari. He actually was an Ismaili Shia doing taqiyya, okay? And he was masquerading as an Ash'ari, and I've explained this in other videos, but that's not the point of this, so I'm not going to digress and go into that. But Ash-Shahrastani, who the Ash'aris accept as a genuine Ash'ari, and he's written books regarding their school and the various different schools, he explains the Ash'ari position in clear terms when he says this, and I quote, "Indeed, Allah the Exalted created the world encompassing all its essences, attributes, and variety of creations and forms without a causative reason compelling him to act, whether such a reason is deemed beneficial or otherwise, for he does not receive either benefit or harm, or whether such a cause is considered beneficial to the creation or not, nor is he spurred by any motivator to act." So he doesn't have a genuine motivator to act one way or another. And thus, there is no purpose in his actions, nor a driving force. Rather, the sole cause of everything is his creation. So look at this. The cause of creation is creation itself. Again, goes back to the same Ash'ari principle that they say for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because they don't believe his acts are with him, his actions are creations. What does that make any sense? It contradicts Arabic grammar. And they say, oh, Jake, you don't know Arabic. You don't know Arabic grammar. The Ash'aris butcher Arabic grammar. They say the fi'l is the same thing as the maf'ul. The act equals the same thing that is acted upon, or the effect of the act. And I'm the one who's butchering Arabic? Okay. There is no purpose in his actions nor a driving force. Rather, the sole cause of everything is his creation, and there is no cause for his creation. As for the verses, so here comes the tafsir, the verse is like saying, and every soul will be compensated for what it earned. The lam, and again, here's where they negate basic Arabic grammar. The letter lam at the beginning of the word, at the start, indicates the outcome and the unfolding of affairs and consequences, right? In Arabic, they call it lam al-aqiba. Whereas in actual fact, many of these examples are the lam of ta'lil. But they reject all examples for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of the lam of ta'lil in the Quran. But Jake doesn't know basic Arabic grammar, right? But the Ash'aris, they're the masters of tafsir, right? They say the lam at the start indicates the outcome and the unfolding of affairs and consequences, not the lam of causation. So they say all of these examples of lam in the Quran referring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions and what he creates and what he doesn't. Just like in the Quran when it says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the jinn and mankind for what? To worship Allah, for the purpose of worshiping Allah. That is clearly the lam of ta'lil, but the Ash'aris deny this and say, no, it's lam al-aqiba. That's what they say. This is similar to his saying, and the family of Pharaoh picked him up to be an enemy and a grief for them. And his saying, he made for you the night and the day, that you might find rest in them and that you might seek his bounty. So where Allah says he made the day and the night, why? For a purpose, and the purpose is XYZ, they're denying all that. Know that just as causation does not pertain to the essence of the divine or his attributes, it does not apply to his way and actions. Thus, there is no obligation to respond, because it is is thus or due to its nature. Therefore, it cannot be said, here's as clear as we can possibly get, it cannot be said, why did he exist? Okay, we agree with that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is wajib al-wujud, he's the necessary being. There you can't ask why he exists. But here, why was the world created? You cannot ask why was the world created. Why did he create humans or mankind? You cannot ask that. Why did he assign obligations to rational beings? Why did he command that shirk is haram, is prohibited, and say that you must worship him alone? You cannot ask that. Why did he command and prohibit? You cannot ask that. Why did he decree and ordain? He is not asked about what he does, but they are asked. Now, he's not saying that you cannot ask in the sense of that there's a reason, but we can't ask and he doesn't have to give us the reason. No. He's saying that there is no reason prior to the act as to why Allah created, why he commanded monotheism, why he prohibited shirk, any of that. Okay? Very clear. Then Ash-Shahrastani clarifies and explains further. He says his will, exalted be he, is comprehensive, pertaining to the order of the entire existence, and is not contingent upon any reason. Thus, it cannot be said that he chose this for a specific purpose, or that he did this for a particular cause. So you cannot say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to allow what is happening in Palestine and Palestine right now for a specific reason, rather than something else. You cannot say that as an Ash'ari. Wow, shocking. For everything has a cause, yet there is no cause for his creation. There is no cause or reason for his creation. Exalted be he, rather he only wills what he knows, meaning he just wills whatever he wants. It's completely arbitrary. There's not a reason why he chooses one thing over another. No. Then people will say, oh, hold on a second. Maybe that's only Ash-Shahrastani. Even though it's as clear as day, he says you cannot ask why. Not because we won't know or Allah doesn't have to give us the reason, but because there is no reason. There is no why, just like there is no why Allah has the attribute of kalam, or there is no why of Allah's that or essence. There is no why in terms of his actions. There's no reason for why he chooses one thing instead of another whatsoever. Now, At-Taftazani explains this very simply. He explains the Ash'ari moral principle, which is his based on. He says, should he, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, decree what he has prohibited, it would be deemed good, and vice versa. Meaning that the Ash'aris believe in a radical divine command theory, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could simply just will anything. He can will to command shirk, even though he made it haram. He could, if he wants to, he can just simply will for shirk to be a good thing, and it would be good, just because he said it would. Does this make any sense? Of course it doesn't, and we see how deeply problematic it is. Al-Ghazali, remember I mentioned Al-Ghazali earlier, confirms exactly what William Lane Craig said. Al-Ghazali says, and I quote, Allah does not mind if he forgives all disbelievers and punishes all believers. For this is not impossible within his essence, nor does it contradict any of his divine attributes. This is because the concept of obligation, taklif, signifies his authority over his servants. In the realm of his divinity and majesty, disbelief and belief, as well as obedience and rebellion, hold equal standing. So in the sight of Allah, imagine this, in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Al-Ghazali is saying that belief, iman, and kufr are exactly the same. There is no difference between iman, belief of the Palestinians. We see their iman, the women and the children. We see their iman even through all of this struggle. Their iman is no different in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than the kufr of the shaitan. There's no difference for Allah. Do you believe that? If you don't, then you cannot affirm what Ghazali said, and you cannot affirm the Ash'ari position. He says if Allah will, because it's no difference to Allah, he can take all of the believers, including all of the prophets and the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, and throw them into the hellfire, astaghfirullah, and bring the shaitan and the Pharaoh and Abu Lahab and all of the kuffar and put them all into Jannah. And it would be equal in the sight of Allah. There's no difference. This is what Al-Ghazali is saying. And he doesn't say that, oh, it doesn't contradict his qudra, meaning it doesn't contradict his power alone. It's not because, he could do it, but he's weak. No. He doesn't just leave it at that. He says it doesn't contradict any of his divine attributes or his essence, meaning it doesn't conflict with his divine wisdom. It doesn't conflict with his divine perfection. It doesn't conflict with his divine knowledge. So the Ash'aris who say that no, he does act with hikmah or wisdoms or reasons, they're just not necessitating. No. He says you cannot say that it contradicts Allah's wisdom to throw the Prophet, peace be upon him, in hellfire and put the shaitan in paradise. Now, do you think that contradicts Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wisdom, his hikmah? If you do, then you cannot be an Ash'ari. If you don't, then Bismillah, go ahead. Now, if that wasn't enough for you. Let's go to Al-Baqillani. He says, and I quote, "It must be understood," basically saying the same thing as Al-Ghazali, "it must be understood that obedience is not the cause of reward, nor is disobedience the cause of punishment. No one is entitled to impose anything upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Most High. Rather, the rewards and favors He bestows upon the servant are manifestations of His grace, while punishment is an expression of His justice. The servant is required to fulfill what Allah the Exalted has enjoined upon him, for there exists neither necessity nor obligation for Allah." So he's basically saying the same thing as Al-Ghazali, that there is no obligation, and we wouldn't word it that way in terms of obligation, but that's not the point. We would say that it contradicts Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hikmah, such that He never actually would throw the shaitan into paradise, into Jannah, and the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam into the hellfire. That contradicts His hikmah, His wisdom, and His divine perfection. Al-Ghazali and Al-Baqillani said, no, it doesn't. Maybe that wasn't enough for you, right? So let's go on further and listen to another quote from Al-Baqillani, where he says, and this is a chapter in his text, "The chapter on Allah's creation of the world was not for a purpose." So he says, if someone were to ask, do you say that the creator of the world made it after having not made it due to a motive that called him to act, a mover that moved him, an instigator that urged him, a purpose that disturbed him, or a thought that necessitated the occurrence of events from him? Or did He create it for none of the reasons you mentioned? Meaning, did Allah create it for a reason or not? Here, it would be said, indeed, He, the Exalted, created the world for none of the reasons you asked about. If it were asked, what is the proof for that? It would be said, the proof for this is that motives, instigators, purposes, and thoughts only apply to one who is in need, who can seek to acquire benefits or repel harms. This only applies to someone who can experience pleasure and pain, inclinations and aversions. All of that indicates the temporality and need of the one described by such qualities, and this is impossible for the Eternal, the Exalted. Likewise, instigating causes that move and motivate actions only affect the heedless, awaken the ignorant, and arise in the fearful and hopeful, those who fear harm from neglecting actions and hope for benefit by performing them. Allah is above all such things. So he very clearly answers the question, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala choose to create the world instead of not choosing to create it? Why did He choose to create the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam instead of choosing not to create him? Why did He choose to reveal the Quran as the last and final revelation instead of not revealing it? All of those questions you cannot answer. He didn't do it for a reason. He says that you cannot say He did it for a reason, and then He gives His explanation, because if you say that Allah did it for a reason, then that means He's in need and blah, 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 blah. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the details of their arguments for why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't act for reasons. That will be in the next video, inshallah, where I'll go through a couple of their main basic arguments, and then I'll bring the refutations of Shaykh al-Islam and Ibn al-Qayyim refuting this nonsensical arguments that they bring. So here, let's go to another one of their scholars. Al-Baydawi says what? He confirms the exact same thing. He says, Allah the Exalted acts as He wills and chooses. There is no cause for His creation, nor any ultimate purpose for His actions. There is no cause or ultimate purpose for His actions or creation or anything whatsoever. Then Ar-Razi, again, who I mentioned earlier, says, it is impermissible to affirm causes or reasons for Allah's actions. He says, it is impermissible for the actions and judgments of Allah the Exalted to be contingent upon any cause whatsoever. Not just not a necessitating cause, but upon any cause or reason whatsoever. Then As-Sanusi explains brilliantly the Ash'ari position, and these are the heads of the Ash'aris. I'm not going to some random lay people on the street. He says, it is impossible for His actions, exalted be He, to possess a purpose. For if He had a purpose behind His actions, it would imply that He is obliged to fulfill it. Otherwise, it would not be a cause for Him, and He would be subjugated. How could that be when your Lord creates and chooses as He wills? So simply, he says, there's no reason or purpose behind the action. Now again, remember what I mentioned earlier from Ash-Shahrastani of how the Ash'aris denied the lam of ta'lil for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He created the jinn and mankind to worship Him. They deny that He actually, that's to be taken literally. So Saeed Foda, who has a commentary on the Sanusi Creed, he says this on page 112 in the English version, when he's actually quoting and and endorsing another scholarly commentary on the text, he says this, and I quote, "Worship is not a literal reason for the creation. It is metaphorical." They even make ta'wil of the verse that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created jinn and mankind to worship him, because it can't literally mean that. You can't actually literally affirm the lam of ta'lil in that case, that Allah had the actual hikmah or wisdom or reason for creating jinn and mankind was to worship him. You can't believe that as an Ash'ari. So they even make ta'wil of that and all of the other ayat that mention the lam of ta'lil. So again, remember that Mufti in the beginning said these are their scholars of tafsir. Yeah, look at them, rejecting so many clear verses in the Quran. Then Al-Amidi argues for why Allah does not act for reasons, just so you can get a glimpse into this. He says, Al-Amidi, if the act of Allah, exalted be He, is not devoid of wisdom or purpose, so he says if it's not devoid of wisdom or purpose, meaning that it is devoid of wisdom and purpose, then this purpose is either eternal, meaning pre-existent, or temporal, newly occurring, it had a beginning in time. If it is eternal, then either the act must also be eternal due to the eternity of its purpose, or it is not necessary. If this necessitates the eternity of the act, this is impossible, as we will demonstrate when addressing the temporal nature of his acts. If the act does not need to be eternal despite the eternity of its purpose, then the purpose is not realized by that act, since it is already achieved independently of the act. And if the purpose is not realized by his act, then there is no purpose in his act, which is our intended conclusion. So the intended conclusion of Al-Amidi is what? That there is no purpose and wisdom in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's acts. But now we're going to see another text from Al-Amidi where it seems like he contradicts himself. Now remember, the Mufti in the beginning says, oh, we don't deny Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wisdom whatsoever. So we'll see exactly, that's true, they will use the word hikmah for Allah, but we'll see how they use it. So Al-Amidi says, we do not deny that Allah, exalted be He, is wise in His actions. However, this wisdom is realized in what He perfects in His creation and in His actions being in accordance with His knowledge and will. This does not necessitate that there be a purpose or an objective in His actions. Futility would only arise from the absence of purpose if His actions were of the kind that requires a purpose, which is the point of dispute. So again, he's still affirming, he's affirming the word hikmah, which we'll see in just a second exactly what the Ash'aris mean when they affirm hikmah for Allah. What does he say? That it's in creation, that hikmah is not on the side of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not something prior to His action to command shirk or to prohibit shirk. No, it's not prior to the act that informs him to choose one thing over another. No. The hikmah can only be said after the act and within creation. But we'll see how deeply problematic that is, extremely problematic. And I'll show again from that same text, the Sanusi Creed commentary by Saeed Foda, where he explains the exact same thing, the difference between a purpose or a gharad and a hikmah or a wisdom. So Saeed Foda says in his commentary on the Sanusi Creed on page 111, he endorses again another commentary on the text which states what? Quote, wisdom is the result of an action or judgment. It is not a motivator for a particular thing. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's hikmah or wisdom is not prior to the act, which Allah says, oh yes, it's more wise to prohibit shirk and command monotheism versus commanding shirk and prohibiting monotheism. There is no hikmah prior to the act, which Allah says, oh, this is more perfect than that, therefore I choose this. No. There is none. The hikmah or the wisdom is only the result of the act. It's only within creation itself. But that doesn't help us, because many people, and atheists and even Muslims, struggle with the problem of evil. They see so much evil in the world. They say, why in the world is this happening to the Palestinians? Why is there so much oppression in Muslim lands? Why are Muslims being killed and mistreated? And why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not coming to their aid? Why is this happening? Why are these things happening in the world? We struggle and we think about it and we try to understand. Now the believers, those firm in Iman, say what? Even if we don't know. And this is the moral of the story with Musa alayhi salam and Al-Khidr, where he told Musa alayhi salam, you will not be patient with me. Why? Because you didn't have the knowledge. And as they went along on their journey, one thing after another, Musa alayhi salam was not patient. Then Al-Khidr had to inform Musa alayhi salam that you were not patient with me, and now here's all of the reasons why I did these different things. But many things we will not know as common Muslims, why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed for something to happen, even though it looks so terrible to us. But we trust and we know, based on the example and the story of Musa alayhi salam and many other examples, similar examples in the Quran and Sunnah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala always has a perfect hikmah and wisdom, even if we can't understand why it happened. Because we only have a screenshot, we only have a picture of the film, but he is the creator of the entire film. The entire film is before him, and he knows why everything is happening, and he willed for it to happen for specific reasons and purposes, not for no reason whatsoever, not willy-nilly, not just based on some arbitrary will, just saying, oh, I'm just going to do this instead of this for no reason at all. Astaghfirullah. No. Here's where Al-Iji, okay, the Ash'ari scholar Al-Iji, says what? It's impermissible to affirm ta'leel. He says the 8th point regarding the actions of Allah, the Exalted, not being motivated by purposes, a view held by the Ash'aris, is that they said, meaning the Ash'ari said, it is impermissible, la yajuz, to attribute any purpose or ultimate cause or ta'leel to his actions. This view is supported by esteemed philosophers. Oh, Brother Jake and these blockhead Salafis, they just don't understand. We don't have the aql. Subhanallah, we don't have the aql that these mutafalsifa have and these mutakalimun. May Allah protect us from that arrogance and absurdity of the claims that they have. They say this view is supported by the esteemed philosophers and various theologians. So Al-Iji explicitly says that the Ash'aris say it is not permissible, la yajuz, to affirm ta'leel, or that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala acts for reasons or purposes. Now the Maturidi scholar Shamsuddin al-Samarqandi says what? He has some harsh words for the Ash'aris on this position to show all of these people who are just saying, oh, it's the Ash'aris and Maturidis against Jake. No, this is hopefully inshallah a lesson for the Maturidis as well, because your scholars have basically accused the Ash'aris over denying ta'leel. Basically the lazim of their position is kufr. You'll see this very clearly. Okay, so he says, and I quote, actions in this way do not contradict God's absolute perfection. In fact, they are the very essence of it. The opposite would be a sign of deficiency and purposelessness, meaning to deny ta'leel for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions would be a sign of deficiency and purposelessness, which the Ash'aris say, no, it's not. Consider the mission of the prophets. Their purpose is to guide humanity and serve as a proof or a hujjah, okay, against them. Miracles are manifested to confirm their truthfulness. Therefore, whoever denies the existence of ta'leel for God's actions effectively denies prophethood itself, and their arguments invalidate prophethood. So what is this Maturidi scholar saying? The Ash'aris who deny ta'leel, the lazim of their qawl, the entailment of their position is that they must deny prophethood. Why? Because the entire understanding behind prophethood is that God sent prophets for the purpose of performing miracles, and those miracles are for the purpose of confirming the truthfulness of those prophets, and the prophets are sent by God for the purpose of guiding humanity. But the Ash'aris have to deny this because they say Allah doesn't do anything for any reason. They deny ta'leel. The Maturidis say, or at least their standard classical position, is that this entails, the lazim of it is kufr. It's a denial of prophethood and miracles. And you guys say, oh, no, these are just some obscure debates. No, they're not. They're not at all. Now, I'm going to quote a modern Ash'ari scholar who comments on this dispute and criticizes the Ash'aris and is basically saying, why are they rejecting ta'leel? This is ridiculous. He says the argument they use to reject teleological causation, basically acting for a purpose, ta'leel, for God's actions rests on two faulty premises. It's indeed strange that they, meaning the Ash'aris, acknowledge that God's actions are not devoid of hikmah or wisdom and benefit, yet these very aspects can be considered causes and purposes. After all, the outcome of an action by an all-knowing agent would naturally be a purpose because it serves as a motive for the action based on the agent's perfect knowledge and will. I fail to understand their hesitation in acknowledging God's actions and purposes. In my view, this position is likely a consequence of pushing their theological principles, meaning the usul. He's saying this is an usuli matter to the extreme in the debate. So they got into a debate with the Mu'tazila and they pushed their position to the extreme. It's a foundational principle. It's an usuli principle. They push it to the extreme to refute the Mu'tazila and they went off the rails. That's what Ibn Ashur is saying. And some Maliki scholars today have even said, oh yeah, he actually could have even started his own school of fiqh. So this is one of their greatest scholars in fiqh of the past 150 years. He is chastising the Ash'aris and saying, why are you denying ta'leel? So is this just a misunderstanding of Jake? Of course not. And I'm demonstrating it time and time and time again. For my Atharis and Salafi brothers and sisters, inshallah, just so you show again that this is not Jake saying this is not just Jake misinterpreting the Ash'aris. This is how Ibn Taymiyyah understands the Ash'ari view as well. He says, and I quote, the assertion of Abul Hasan al-Ash'ari and those who align with him or align with the Ash'aris regarding the negation of wisdom and causes in the Sharia is in direct contradiction to the consensus of the Salaf and the jurists. It's in direct contradiction to the ijma', to the consensus of the scholars from the Salaf and the fuqaha. He says, among their core principles is the belief that Allah does not create or command for any specific wisdom. They assert that there is no lam of causation. There is no lam of ta'lil in the Quran. Remember, I showed you what? I said it in the beginning, after this mufti made a claim about that the Ash'aris are the masters of tafsir, when they deny the lam of ta'lil in the Quran. I showed Ash-Shahrastani saying they deny the lam of ta'lil explicitly. Now I'm showing Ibn Taymiyyah again, accusing them of that and saying that this is their position, that they deny ta'lil in the Quran. I also showed Sa'id Foda saying the exact same thing, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not create the men and jinn kind to worship him. He didn't create them with the purpose or for the purpose of worshiping him. No, we have to understand that metaphorically. That's lam al-aqiba, okay? That's not lam al-ta'lil. That's their position. And Jake, I don't know Arabic. Okay, no problem. I'm an ignoramus. But guess what? I still know the difference between the fi'l and the maf'ul. And I still know the difference of when a lam of ta'lil is being used. And I do not deny and have to make ta'wil of it and say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because he doesn't act for any reason whatsoever, I have to deny the clear understanding of this ayah and so many other ayat in the Quran. He says, they assert there is no lam of ta'lil in the Quran or lam of causation in the Quran concerning his creation and directives. When they address natural matters, they attribute all occurrences to the mere inclination of the omnipotent without reason, maintaining that instances of conjunction are purely habitual and lack any connection between this and that. So there's no connection between when I throw a rock and it hits the glass and the glass breaking, which is another problem which is related to this of Allah acting or creating for reasons, is directly created to their moral theory, it's directly connected to their radical divine command theory, and it's also connected to their occasionalist theory where they completely deny that there is genuine causation in the world or any secondary causation, meaning that when I type on the keyboard and my fingers hit the buttons on the keyboard and letters appear on the screen, they deny that there's any connection between me hitting my fingers on the keyboard and the letters appearing on the screen. It's just ridiculous. But yet, these are the people of aql. And only somebody without a brain, only somebody without aql would disagree with them about this, right? He says, Shaykh al-Islam says, they may even ascribe this claim to the Sunnah. They claim that this is from the Sunnah. Of course it's not. He says, this view has never been expressed by any of the Salaf among the Imams or by any of the Imams of the Muslims, whether from the four recognized schools or others. Rather, the established views from them and others stand in opposition to this assertion, although certain groups of their later followers have repeated it, following those who espoused it among the adherents of who? Jahm bin Safwan, right? The Jahmis. So again, this is a Jahmi position. It comes from the Jahmites. It does not come from the Quran and Sunnah. It does not come from the Imams of the Sunnah. It does not come from our tradition. It comes from the Jahmis and what they tried to put forward based on their pseudo-rational principles that they got from the Greeks and everywhere else, every Tom, Dick, and Harry under the sun except from the Quran and Sunnah. And then they want to read the Quran and Sunnah and do tafsir and exegesis of a hadith and understanding of the Sunnah based on their pseudo-rational principles, and they want to reject the lam of ta'lil in the Quran. That's what they want to do. Now, more from Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah says, the Salaf, the jurists, and the majority affirm the existence of wisdom in Allah's creation and commands. Those who assert that he creates nothing with wisdom or commands nothing with wisdom acknowledge only pure will, which arbitrarily favors one of two equivalent options over the other without any criteria. Remember, Al-Ghazali said, and Al-Baqalani said, that kufr and iman are equal in the sight of Allah. There is no difference between kufr and iman according to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no difference between, according to Al-Ghazali, they're both equal in the sight of Allah, and he only chooses one over the other, only commanding shirk or prohibiting shirk, one over the other, just based on his pure arbitrary will. It's not because of a hikmah or divine wisdom. The same thing with throwing the Prophet ﷺ into the hellfire, astaghfirullah. There's no difference between that and putting a shaitan in paradise for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no difference between that. That's what their position is. Now, if you reject that, then you do for good reason, because you still have a semblance of an aql left. You haven't been completely emasculated with the pseudo-rational principles morals of the Greeks, and you still have a concept of the fitrah left. It hasn't been completely clouded. And these, modern day mutakallimun, these Ash'aris, and even Maturidis who don't understand this, they just are completely ignorant of their own positions. They don't know what their school actually teaches, okay, unfortunately. Then Shaykh al-Islam says, this is the foundational view of Ibn Kulab and his followers. They argue that actions do not encompass characteristics that can be classified as rulings, nor do they possess attributes that serve as justifications for those rulings. Rather, the omnipotent, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has chosen one of the equivalent options purely out of will, without wisdom or consideration for the benefit in creation and in the matter. They maintain that it is possible for Allah to command shirk, to command polytheism, and to prohibit worshiping Him alone. It is also possible for Him to command injustice and immorality while forbidding righteousness and piety. We say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would never actually do that because it contradicts His hikmah. But Al-Ghazali said, no. Doing that does not contradict any of His attributes. Not only does it not contradict His qudra or His power, but it does not contradict His hikmah or any attributes. Now, again, just to show that this is not just Shaykh al-Islam, to show another Athari scholar, Ibn al-Qayyim, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on both of them. He says, the Jabriya are those, which are basically the Ash'aris, the Jabriya are those who reject the notions of wisdom and causality, claiming that it is possible for him to enact any conceivable action and that he is not exempt from engaging in evil deeds. Rather, every possible action is deemed unobjectionable as it emanates from him. Only that which is impossible in itself is considered evil, such as the combination of opposites. Like, they don't say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not put the Prophet into hellfire and the shaitan into a paradise. They don't say that that's a contradiction or contradicts His wisdom. Only thing that they would not say is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would create a square circle. So they'll say He wouldn't create a square circle, but they won't say that He wouldn't put the shaitan in paradise and the Prophet, peace be upon him, in the hellfire. Imagine that. It's disgusting. It's absolutely ridiculous. And then he says, therefore, it is possible for Him to punish His angels, prophets, messengers, and the righteous, while honoring Iblis and his followers and placing them above His righteous servants in eternal bliss, which is exactly what William Lane Craig accused Islam of. But now we come to find out it's the Ash'ari position, not the Islamic position, not the position of the Quran and Sunnah, right? Which is actually causing that brother who asked that question, the Muslim, a shubha, and that's why he put forward that question to Craig. It's not the Islamic position, it's the Ash'ari position, not the position of the Quran and Sunnah, which Ibn al-Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah are representing. The Ash'aris is saying exactly that, and I've already shown that, because Taftazani already said that anything that Allah said was prohibited or bad, He could just as easily have said that it was good, including shirk and anything else under the sun. Everything is included within that statement. Same thing that I mentioned, Al-Baqalani and Al-Ghazali affirming this. Ibn al-Qayyim says, we have no means to ascertain the impossibility of such acts except by denying contradiction in His revelation. That's what the Ash'ari say, meaning they say it's only known through the naql, it's only known through the revelation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wouldn't do that. We can't know it through it prior to the naql. We can't know it through the fitrah or prior to revelation, but that's not our position. We say that we can know certain moral facts prior to revelation, like that shirk is bad, is haram, and worshipping Allah alone is good. The Ash'ari say they have no means to ascertain the impossibility of such acts except by denying contradiction in His revelations. That goes into, another issue which we don't have time to go into, about whether Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could lie. The Ash'aris have no genuine way to avoid that, and I know they'll try to come up with their arguments, and we can go back and forth, and I'll refute all of those, inshallah, in due time. That deserves an entirely separate video. Thus He, meaning Allah, could command by His will the prostration to idols, lying, immorality, and the spilling and plundering of wealth, while forbidding righteousness, truthfulness, charity, and chastity. There is no difference in and of itself, meaning in essence, between what He commands and what He prohibits, which is what Taftazani said, except for the arbitrary nature of His will, which is the standard Ash'ari position. He commands this and prohibits that without there being any attribute of goodness in what He commands that necessitates His love for it, nor an attribute of evil in what He forbids that necessitates His dislike. These individuals, meaning the Ash'aris, have effectively nullified His praise in reality. They've completely nullified the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. according to Ibn al-Qayyim, with this position, affirming for him a dominion devoid of glorification, even though in truth they have not established for him a kingdom. They render him inactive in both the eternal past and future, unable to perform any action whatsoever. That's a whole nother thing, exactly what we've been saying. In the actuality, which is so bogus, is so mind-blowing, that they say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only actor, but in reality, he doesn't even do anything. But that's a whole nother thing. Many of them have also negated his attributes of perfection, without which it is impossible for him to be a sovereign Lord or deity. Thus, they have established neither kingship nor praise for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's what Ibn al-Qayyim said. Now, I want to remind everybody what Ibn Taymiyyah said at the very beginning. What I said for Ibn Taymiyyah at the very beginning. This is a significant matter, one of the most paramount major issues that people have engaged in, encompassing the greatest of division and branches, and is replete with doubts and contentions, for it is related to the attributes of Allah, exalted be He, His names, actions, commandments, concerning orders and prohibitions, promises and threats. It pertains to His creation and command, for everything in existence is connected to this matter. Everything in existence is connected to this matter, including what is happening right now in Palestine. Is there a reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is willing for what is occurring there and the oppression in the Muslim world? Is there a reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is allowing that for that to happen? I believe there is. I believe that there's a hikmah for why it's happening. I believe that there's a hikmah for why everything is happening, and not just on the side of creation, but prior to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willing it. So to summarize this video and this issue, I did not misrepresent the Ash'aris. They do not believe that Allah acts for reasons and that they're just not necessitating reasons. No, as I established, there is no why, as Ash-Shahrastani said, whatsoever to his actions. There is no why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did or does anything. It's only by his pure arbitrary will. Because in the sight of Allah, there is no difference between kufr and shirk on one hand and iman on the other. There's no difference. There's no difference between sending the believers to hellfire and the shaitan and his iblis and his followers to paradise. There's no objective difference for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's what the Ash'ari position is. There is no why for whatever all of his actions. Wisdom is only within creation, not with Allah or his actions, as I showed from Sa'id Foda. Ibn Taymiyyah, as I just demonstrated again, clearly says that this is one of the most important issues as it encompasses every single thing in creation, okay? So, question for the Ash'aris out there. If you're an Ash'ari, if you're a card-carrying Ash'ari, but you never heard about the details of this issue, after watching this video, I have a question for you and I want you to answer in the comment section of this video. Do you as an Ash'ari, do the Ash'aris believe out there? This is for Dr. Shadi Al-Masri. This is for Yasser Al-Hanafi. This is for Mr. Muhammad who posted that video, if you're an Ash'ari, and the other Ash'aris out there, the other brother who I showed on there, his original statement. Were you ignorant of these facts? And if you're not, why are you trying to tell me that I'm misrepresenting Ash'ari Aqidah? No, I'm not. I demonstrated quite clearly that this is the Ash'ari position. So take your distortions back, accept that this is the position, and then come out and tell me if you agree with it or not. Do you actually believe that there is no difference for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala between him commanding shirk and prohibiting shirk? Do you believe there is no difference, that they're equivalent to him in the sight of Allah, and he only chooses one over the other in light of his arbitrary will? Is that your position? If so, what is your dalil from the Quran and Sunnah? Who gave you the authority to lie against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that fashion? This is my criticism of the Ash'aris, of not knowing their own Aqidah and calling me a liar, but in actual fact, they're ignorant. But now here's again my criticism of the Salafis and Athadis. If Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah is saying that this is one of the most important issues that's connected to everything in creation, why are we not talking about it? Why are we not talking about it? That's what I want people to think about. And we should be talking about it much more. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the Ash'aris say that ta'leel cannot be affirmed, while the Maturidis say that what? It's necessary to affirm. They say you must affirm it because without affirming ta'leel, the lazim of it is kufr, of denying miracles and denying prophethood itself, which I have a paper on this going into detail demonstrating while the Ash'ari view entails a rejection of prophethood and miracles, and they cannot actually establish the truthfulness of the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam. Not to say that they don't agree with it or that they say that, you know, he's not a true prophet. Of course they do, but they give lip service to it in the sense that they don't see that their own positions entail negating that. And I have a paper on that, and it'll be in the description of this video. I want people to, again, to go back to the beginning of the video. Do you believe that there is a reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is allowing for everything to occur, and he's willing for everything to occur, including the atrocities in Palestine right now? Is there a hikmah? Is there a divine purpose and wisdom behind it? If you do, if you believe that, and you believe that he had that divine wisdom and purpose from eternity past, or you believe that he had it before creating the land of Palestine itself, and that he knew what would occur, and he had a reason for everything that he was doing, then you cannot be an Ash'ari. Simple as that. Now again, Again, I demonstrated how this issue is still important today, where I showed the clip from William Lane Craig. It's extremely important answering the doubts of atheists or even Muslims struggling with the problem of evil. Why is all this evil in this world? Why is this happening? We trust and we know from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that there is a hikmah, even if we don't always know what the reason is behind it. We may not experience or know it in this life, but inshallah we'll understand the wisdoms behind a lot of things that we didn't understand in the afterlife, inshallah. Lastly, with the Euthyphro dilemma, which is relevant today, does God prohibit something because it's evil, or is it evil because God prohibited it? Or is something good because God commanded it, or did God command it because it's good, right? That's a dilemma. Now the Ash'aris say that something is good purely only because God commanded it. Something is evil purely only because God commanded it. And such that, as At-Taftazani said, that the roles could be entirely reversed. We say today that it's good to worship only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but just as easily in the sight of Allah, He could have made it good to actually do shirk and actually worship other than Allah. In His sight, they're equal. It's just unbelievable. So it's still relevant today in responding to atheists and the problem of evil and the Euthyphro dilemma. I've addressed the Euthyphro dilemma before. Brother Bassam Zawadi has a good paper on this that I recommend, which I'll put in the description of this video as well. And then also, as I mentioned, this isn't just some abstract issue that nobody's dealing with. This is something that Muslims and every human being is dealing with on a daily basis, trying to understand, struggling with the evil in the world, and trying to understand what are God's wisdoms and purposes behind allowing these things to happen. William Lane Craig also, as I showed, a modern example of a very popular Christian apologist using an argument which he thinks is against Islam, which is really only against the Ash'ari position, which was spot on and exactly what Al-Ghazali said, that Al-Ghazali said it's equal in the sight of Allah to put the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the prophets and all of the believers into the hellfire, and put the shaitan and the Pharaoh and Abu Lahab and all of the disbelievers into paradise. They're completely equal in the sight of Allah, and He chooses one over the other only based on His complete arbitrary will, not based on some prior hikmah or perfection. Truly, I say this honestly, if I believed that that was the standard position of the Quran wa Sunnah and what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his companions came with and brought and taught to us, I would not be a Muslim today. I would leave the fold of Islam. I would have never become a Muslim to begin with. This is how serious this is, what they're spewing. And as Shaykh al-Islam said, it's relevant to every single matter in creation. And then we have these Aqidah liberalists who take their position and say, oh, these are just minor ikhtilafi matters. Even the Maturidis accuse the Ash'aris of kufr on this point. The entailment of their position is kufr, of rejecting miracles and prophethood. How could you say that it's irrelevant? No, it's not, sir. Maybe you people are irrelevant, but don't tell us what to speak about. Inshallah, we will keep speaking the truth, no matter who likes it and who doesn't, inshallah. With that being said, guys, I hope that you found this video educational. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell so you get notified of future videos. Also, like, comment on this, let me know your thoughts on the Ash'ari position. Do you think I'm still misrepresenting them? Do you think I am representing them accurately? And what are your thoughts on it? Do you agree with them? Do you not? And tell us why. Share this on your social media platforms and with your friends and family, no matter how small or big your reach is. It really does help with the algorithm, guys. And if you want to go above and beyond and support my channel, then the best two ways to do so are at the two links that are pinned at the top of the description of this video, as well as in the comment section of this video. With that being said, guys, until next time, inshallah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.